And poker and pornography are the order of the day on the weekend. There's 13 to 14 pages of escort services advertised in Fort McMurray. Transvestites are very popular for reasons I don't understand. There's approximately $7 million worth of crack cocaine and crystal meth going up the highway to hell from Edmonton every week to supply the needs of the community working up there. It's easier, I'm told, to order crack cocaine than it is a pizza at most of the work camps. The suicide rate is beyond belief. Spousal abuse is among the highest in the country. In fact, Alberta has the highest spousal abuse rate of any province. The accidents on Highway 63 are depressing. I mean, every week that highway claims the life or maims another tar sands worker, or miner, or engineer. And so the pace and scale has created another journalist who, writing about hydrocarbon boom and what sublet Wyoming called moral carelessness. And that's what we see in Fort McMurray on an extraordinary level. Except we're now beginning to see it throughout the province because the rest of Alberta has become a suburb of Fort McMurray. And parts of British Columbia have become a suburb of Fort McMurray. And we know that the whole island of Newfoundland has become a suburb of Fort McMurray. And you can now go to outports in Fort McMurray where they've never seen crack cocaine and where they have serious crack cocaine problems because the young men and women who've gone to Fort McMurray to make their fortune are bringing back the tarry legacy of that place. Now, industry and government say, yeah, we're okay. All right, Andrew, you got us there. We are making a bit of a mess up there, and that's true. But don't worry, we'll clean it up. And we're very good at cleaning up these kind of messes. Well, I looked at the record, industry's record, in two places, one in Louisiana and one in the Appalachians. And in the Appalachians, we have another marvelous activity going on called mountaintop removal. It's where you blow the hell off a mountain in order to get at the coal seams underneath. And much of New England and much of southern Ontario now runs on coal produced this way. And the debris is all put in riverways and mountain streams, and the destruction is enormous. And the coal mining company said, don't worry, we'll return it to something green. And in truth, they've returned it to something green, but what was there was an incredibly biologically diverse hardwood forest. And what they have replaced it with are blasted out landscapes that support largely grass. And what the Environmental Protection Agency now recognizes is that most of these landscapes are biologically impoverished. They only support less than 50% of the original biological diversity that was in that region. And of course, but we call this sustainable as well. The big issue in the tar sands, which is boreal forest removal going on, is that 50% of the land being disturbed are now wetlands. And we do not know how to recreate these wetlands. And in fact, that's an admission made not long ago by the Cumulative Environmental Management Association, and one of these industry groups up in Fort Mac, where in a recent report in 2006, they concluded this entire mining process is being allowed to proceed with little real knowledge of how it will be reclaimed. Now there's a water emergency going on in Fort McMurray, and it's based on the simple fact that the world's largest energy project is now located in the world's third largest watershed, the Mackenzie River Basin. There's the Amazon, there's the Mississippi, and then there's the Mackenzie River Basin. A sixth of Canada's fresh water is made in this basin, which encompasses much of northern Alberta and the Northwest Territories. So we put this big project up there, and we thought, heck, there's only less than 100,000 people that live downstream, and they're all Aboriginals. Who the hell's going to notice? And the main artery running through there, of course, is the Athabasca River. Phenomenal, beautiful river. It was a river that Ernest Thompson Seton once called the Missouri of the North. Every day, we are using phenomenal amounts of water from this river. It takes 3 barrels of fresh water to make 1 barrel of bitumen. And it takes actually really 12 barrels of water to make 1 barrel of bitumen, 3 of those are lost, ended up in tailings ponds, and have to be replaced. That's the 3. The rest of the water is recycled from these tailings ponds, which I'll talk about in a second. So we have an issue of an enormous amount of water being taken out of the system, in a system whose water is actually in decline by 30% since the 1960s, due to climate change, due to alteration of the landscape, thanks to logging and oil and gas issues. Lots of changes taking place up in that region. But all in all, we're removing enough water from this river every year to supply 2 Calgarys. Then 90% of that water, which we use, we heat it up, we throw in caustic soda, we use it to wash the bitumen to remove the really high, poor quality oil from the sand and the clay. And the water is contaminated with all this clay and heavy metals and salts, and that ends up in tailings ponds. And there are more than 12 of them, and they cover 50 square kilometers on either side of the Athabasca River. And they're all made out of sand, and they all rise out of the forest about 100 meters high. Some of them are 22 kilometers long. Syncrude's main tailings pond is now listed as the world's 2nd largest dam in volume after the Three Gorges Dam in China. Extraordinary. Now they're all leaking because they're only made out of sand, and they're all surrounded by moats, and they're pipes and pumping stations along these moats. And if you walk up to them, I mean, the stench is unbelievable. It's like walking up to a leaking gas station, and the pumps are working away. There's water in the moats, and they're furiously trying to pump it back into the pond. We really do not know how much of this crap is seeping into the groundwater or seeping into the Athabasca River, because the monitoring is that poor. Now, you say, well, surely somebody is taking a look at all this and has a handle on it. Well, in 1997, the government of Alberta and Suncor and Syncrude and a whole bunch of other companies set up something called the Regional Aquatic Monitoring Program. And its job is to look after the Athabasca and make sure nothing happens to the Athabasca as a result of having the world's largest energy project there. And since 1997, it's been issuing reports that read like this. Trends consistent with historical data, generally consistent with historical data, was, no detectable changes in water and sediment quality that could be attributed to oil sands development. Report after report after report saying, no significant effects. Everything is fine, folks, don't worry. And then I found a report done in 2004 by a group of federal scientists, including Bert Nails, who was, that time, the regional director for the Department of Fisheries Oceans for the Arctic. And Bert Nails and 2 senior scientists, as well as 15 other research scientists from across the country, looked at all of RAMP's reports. And what they found, and they didn't call it fraud, but it amounted to fraud. They said, number 1, you've got no regional plan, you have no scientific leadership, and your monitoring is inconsistent and not taking in places where it should be. I mean, one group of scientists were astounded that there was only one monitoring station downstream of the plants themselves on the Athabasca River. And then they looked at the various programs of RAMP. They looked at the acidification of lakes program, and they said, look, your data is all wrong. You haven't got proper baseline data here for this program ever to measure anything. They looked at the aquatic species, and they said, it's inconsistent measurement all along. What the hell are you doing? And they said, this program is designed to find nothing. It will never find any problem with the oil sands. So in 2005, the guys that run RAMP, and again, this is largely industry-funded organization. It's what we do in Alberta. We have industry, fulfill the functions of what government should be doing, but we're so cheap that we decided we'll let industry do it. And they did their own review. They were kind of stunned by this report, even though it was never published and no one in the public really knew about it. And what did they find? In their 2005 review, the suitability of the current RAMP design for monitoring for regional effects is uncertain, and the current density and location of RAMP sampling stations may not be appropriate. So they agreed. So yes, we do have a monitoring station, monitoring program on the Athabasca River, but really, this is the only thing it finds, and this is the result of their 2007 report. There were no detectable regional changes in aquatic resources related to oil sands development. This is third world. This is really disturbing that this would happen in a country like Canada on a watershed that provides us with 1/6 of our fresh water. Now we have an energy, two other emergencies up there. One is an energy emergency, the other is a carbon emergency. And simply put, in terms of energy, natural gas fuels the tar sands. Every day we use enough natural gas for both open pit mining and for SAGD, and SAGD uses the majority of the gas, to heat 6 million homes across the country. 6 million homes a day. That's more than 5% of Canada's natural gas supply annually is being consumed in the tar sands. And if we go up to 3 million barrels, then we're looking in the neighborhood of 16% of our natural gas supply being used to fuel the tar sands. The Canadian Parliament, in its report on the tar sands last year, calculated that if we were to replace natural gas as a fuel source for the tar sands, that it would take 20 nuclear reactors to do so by 2050. Again, to give you a sense of the scale of this project and how it has commandeered the nation's resources, its energy, its politics, its environmental reputation. The carbon emergency. Well, we've all heard a lot about carbon up there. 1 million barrels is equivalent to about 12 million cars every day. So every day, that project is making the same amount of greenhouse gases as 12 million cars. So, 3 Vancouvers, I guess. And really what we have done up there is we've constructed a carbon-making nation within the nation. And so if you think of it this way, the tar sands now produces about 40 million tons of greenhouse gases a year. Well, that's more than the whole country of New Zealand. That's more than many European countries, like Greece or Belgium. And if we continue at this pace, we are going to be one of the world's major carbon emitters. Just one project alone, Statoil, the state oil company of Norway, is proposing a SAGD project, and by 2018 it will be making 13 million tons of greenhouse gases a year. And to give you a sense of the scale of that, that will be equivalent to 1/4 of all of Norway's emissions in 2007. And of course we have, industry and government are saying, well, it's not that many when you look at the broad scheme of things, and globally, it's sort of, well, you can always diminish the importance of anything by applying it to a bigger and bigger picture. And industry and government again are saying, well, let's not worry about that carbon. We've got a great plan. And our plan is this: we're going to have the world's best funeral service, and we're going to set it right up here in Canada. And we're going to take all those nasty greenhouse gases, and we're going to compress them, which is kind of like taking a body and stuffing it in a bag, and then we're going to, put it in a pipeline, and we're going to inject it into the ground and deep into some very saline aquifers outside of Edmonton and outside of Saskatoon, and by God, we're going to bury our problem, and Canada will be triumphant. Well, it sounds like a great idea, except the economics and the scale just don't quite seem to work. Technically, can we do it? Yeah, we could probably do some of this. Will not the CO2 come back up to the surface and suffocate a whole bunch of guys outside of Saskatoon and Edmonton? Maybe. There's a lot of holes in Alberta. Hundreds of thousands of old wells and gas wells all over the place. What if this stuff comes up, and could it not acidify a whole bunch of groundwater on the prairies? Yes, it could do that. But we still think this is a good plan. Moreover, we think that you, the Canadian public, taxpayers, will be just overjoyed to provide up to $16 billion in assistance to build this funeral service, because you know what? There's no hearse. There are no caskets. There are no funeral director at the moment. We have to build this from scratch. So we want your money, $16 billion worth, and instead of putting in high-speed trains in the country, instead of relocalizing food production, instead of better public transport, we're going to build you the world's very best funeral service for carbon. And that's how industry and government propose to deal with this mess. Now here's something to think about. First of all, there's the economics of this. I mean, it's appalling. Second is the scale of it, and this is what Vaclav Smil, who's a University of Manitoba economist and one of the most brilliant energy guys on the planet, he says, sequestering a mere 1/10 of today's global CO2 emissions would require an industry that would have to force underground every year the volume of compressed gas larger than, or with higher compressor, equal to the volume of crude oil extracted globally by the petroleum industry, whose infrastructures and capacities have been put in place over a century of development. Is there or is there not a scale problem here? In other words, we will never make a dent with this program. This program is a scam. But this project has successfully made a mockery of 6 different climate change programs that have consumed $6 billion of taxpayers' money since the 1990s. We burn money in Canada to fight carbon. We do not set carbon targets, and we do not have a carbon tax. We are not serious about any of this yet. And why? Well, the federal government is making a lot of money off the tar sands. And this brings me to my next emergency, which is what I call the money emergency. And the money emergency works this way. I mean, the key entity in Canada that has made the most money from the tar sands to date has been the federal government, and it's made it from corporate taxes. And we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 billion. Approximately $5 to $6 billion a year. Alberta is making from royalties and leases and other forms of economic rent around $4 billion a year. So the guy that's making the most here is the federal government. And you ask, okay, well, what are they doing with all this money? Well, they've used it to reduce your taxes. They've used it to lower the GST by 2%. They've used it to make government become more secretive and less transparent. And they are behaving like a petrostate. The International Monetary Fund looked at Canada and said, you know, what the hell are you guys doing? If you've got that kind of dedicated stream of oil revenue coming in, it should be earmarked, it should be flagged, it should be separated from general revenue, and it should go into a fund. That's not happening. Of course, it's not happening in Alberta either. It's happening in Alaska, by the way. It's happening in Norway, which has a $350 billion fund. Now, what about our sovereignty over time? Well, you can't become the #1 supplier of oil to the world's largest empire, and a fading empire, and an empire in deep trouble at that, without at some point experiencing an enormous amount of pressure to integrate at other levels. Right now, we're supplying the Americans with 1.3 million barrels a day. That's approximately, on an annual basis, you know, the Americans are dependent upon us for 18% of their oil. And 10% of that is coming from the tar sands. And the Americans have got a problem. They're tired of living off bloody oil. And they're tired of sending $400 billion a year to the Middle East to corrupt petro governments who use a lot of that money, sprinkle it around to insurgency groups intent on blowing up the United States in various parts and pieces. And they realize that that's not sustainable. And they realize they've made a big mistake, and they realize now that it's gotten them into a lot of trouble.